Welcome inside our Focus Africa segment. Today, Kenya's political landscape has taken a dramatic turn with the recent dismissal of Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua. On October 18, 2024, the Kenyan Parliament officially approved the appointment of a new Deputy President following Gachagua's removal. This unprecedented decision has sparked significant conversation across the country, raising questions about the future of political stability in Kenya. Gachagua's dismissal comes amid growing tensions within the government, and the implications of this move are expected to reverberate across both political and economic spheres in the coming months. The new deputy president, handpicked by President William Ruto himself, is now tasked with restoring public confidence and ensuring the government maintains focus on its agenda. The political reshuffle has opened up intense debate regarding the balance of power within Kenya's leadership, as well as the strategic implications for the country's upcoming 2027 elections. With this sudden shift, many Kenyans are left wondering what this change means for governance and the policies being rolled out by the Ruto administration.
And so to help us unpack the situation, we are joined by Tele Nzomo. He's a program officer at Siasa Place, and he will provide insights into the unfolding political drama and its possible ramifications for Kenya's democracy. Tele, many thanks for joining us. We appreciate you for doing this with us. Let's get started, shall we? One has to ask, what are the key reasons behind Gachagua's dismissal? And just how is this, reflective of the current political climate in Kenya?
Thank you, Pastor, for having me. I think that the main reason, the only reason for what is happening is that this has been is a political issue. Clearly, there were some problems between the president and his deputy. I think the president was a bit uncomfortable with the fact that Rigathi Gachagua was being a bit aggressive, trying to trying to get more power, especially to become the main politician, or what in Kenya we call the kingpin of central Kenya, or rather Mount Kenya. And I think there were a lot of people within government, and especially allied to the president, who were very uncomfortable with the moves that Gachagua was making, and they decided to get rid of him.
And do you see this political reshuffle as a sign of a deeper tensions within President Ruto's administration? I mean, one has to ask, if he's having issues with his former deputy, what was going on inside the administration?
One of the things that we've seen is that there have been a lot of realignment, especially since the finance bill protests. We actually saw some members of the opposition joining government. We're seeing William Ruto and the person who he was contesting against, Raila Odinga, working closer and closer together. I think the president is trying to realign his government to ensure that the people who he is working with are the people that are closer to him. I think we may see in the coming days maybe a possible government reshuffle where where especially PSs who are aligned to Rigathi Gachagua may be shown the door. So the president, I think, is just trying to realign his government. Clearly, a lot of things have changed since the last election. As I said, working with the opposition, and I think we're going now to see a new look, somewhat of a new look government.
Tele, President Ruto has had quite a year for 2024. The protests, for one, was a very big deal. The doctors, the youth also rising up and making clear their dissent. So it's been a very tough year. However, that also affects his the public confidence that people have in the presidency. So leading up to 2027 elections, what are the implications of this reshuffle in his administration? What will the implications be during the elections?
Yeah, I think Rigathi Gachagua comes from the Mount Kenya region. And it's going to be interesting to see, number one, there are some politicians who were aligned with Rigathi Gachagua, who actually voted against his impeachment. It's going to be important to see how do they actually react. The second thing is actually the position of the former president. The former president is still quite very popular in this country, rather in central Kenya. So it will be very interesting to see what position does he take. Do they align with Rigathi Gachagua? The two have had a lot of issues, especially in the lead up to the last election. But it will be interesting to see how does Mount Kenya region react. But another interesting factor is that the relationship between William Ruto and Raila Odinga, is this going to be a relationship that will lead to the next election? Because if William Ruto has Raila Odinga and has the votes that come from Raila Odinga, especially the votes from Western region, he may not necessarily need the entire Mount Kenya votes. So if he manages to get that and split the Mount Kenya vote, he may still have a good chance of winning the elections. And unfortunately, our politics is still very, very tribal. And whereas we're starting to see, at least with the younger people, some of that changing, I think if he manages to play his cards well, in as far as getting the tribal dynamics right, I think he will still stand a good chance of retaining the presidency next time around.
Okay. Well, Tele, in Nigeria here, if there's such an instance that involves dismissal, replacement, or removal, you're sure that somebody's definitely going to the courts, not just the courts, but then the Supreme Court and on like that. We have a very heavy influence of the judiciary inside of our politics here in Nigeria. In Kenya, with this dismissal and replacement, is there any such legal, perhaps maybe recourse that the opponents might be taking? Do you think this might happen in this instance?
It's actually already happened. Professor Kindiki was initially meant to be sworn in yesterday, but the courts actually postponed or stopped the swearing in until cases against the petitioner had. Rigathi Gachagua and other people have already moved to court. The cases, I think, are supposed to be heard from Tuesday moving forward. It's actually an interesting case because this is the first time a deputy president has been impeached in this country. So there's no precedent for me to be able to look at and say this is what will happen. But the courts are actually going to have their say on this matter. I know there are challenges. They have gone to challenge, number one, the public participation process. The lawyers of Rigathi Gachagua saying public participation was not carried out properly. Secondly, there's also the question as to whether the fact that he was sick and he wasn't actually allowed, or rather he claimed to be sick and he wasn't allowed to be cross-examined, whether that will also pose a challenge. So we're in uncharted territory, but it will be interesting to see what the High Court says, and it's very possible that indeed this matter might lead up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court might have the final say on this issue.
Right. I mean, one has to ask at this point about his replacement, Kindiki, if I got that correctly. Tell us more about him and also, the people's perception of the new deputy.
Yeah, so Professor Kindiki is a person who's been in politics now for the last 10 years. He served as a senator. He has a personal relationship with William Ruto. As a lawyer, he actually represented William Ruto at the International Criminal Court when he had his cases at the ICC. So he has had a relationship with him. In the lead up to the last election, Kindiki was actually one of the two people, together with Rigathi Gachagua, who was being considered for the position of deputy president. In fact, from the stories that came out, it's that members of parliament at that time preferred Kindiki to replace Gachagua. I think when you want to look at his appointment, there are two ways to look at it. Number one is the political side of things. I think a lot of people view him as being a safer option. He's never really been a safe option. Of course, all politicians are ambitious, but he is seen to not ruffle a lot of feathers. He gets along with quite a lot of people, with quite a lot of people. So, his appointment is seen to be, this is the right person to deputize the president and not challenge the president in any way. But when you talk about people's perception, I think there are worries about Kindiki because he was, or is actually, he still is the Cabinet Secretary of Interior, and his role during the finance protests. You remember, we had a lot of people who lost their lives because they were gunned down by police. There were a lot of cases of, kidnappings and abductions in this country, and so his role as the person in charge of the security apparatuses here in Kenya, I think, has caused a lot of people a lot of worry. The fact that he played such an aggressive role during those protests, has a lot of people concerned and thinking that he's not fit to actually hold this position.
And lastly, before we let you go, just to look at this removal of Gachagua and just basically Kenya's political narrative in terms of power struggle and its democracy. Does this affirm Kenya's democracy? Does it solidify it, or do we see a different chapter in the Kenya's political narrative?
In my opinion, this process has actually been a bit worrying, because it shows you that the president is really, really, the arms of government that are supposed to be independent are not independent, and that we have an extremely powerful president. One of the things about the 2010 constitution was that it wanted to remove what we used to call the imperial presidency. But that seems to have crept in, where the president tells the National Assembly what to do, tells the Senate what to do, and they do not, and they cannot say anything. There was actually an interesting concern. There were a lot of concerns as to how agencies such as the IEBC, such as the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, such as how independent institutions were able to clear Gachagua in such a quick manner, just because there was pressure from government. So it is really worrying for the state of democracy in this country, the fact that we have such a powerful president who is controlling independent bodies and independent arms of government. So my opinion is that this is a very worrying state for us as a country.
Well, Tele, thank you so much. We appreciate you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, as usual.